I spent 3 full growing seasons convinced that my small backyard garden just could not produce enough food to make the effort worthwhile. I was cramming 12 different vegetables into about 60 square feet, and honestly, most of them barely gave me enough to fill a single salad bowl before the season was over. That was my wake-up call. It was not about growing more varieties. It was about growing the right ones. Once I narrowed my focus down to just 5 vegetables, my harvest tripled in that exact same tiny space. Today, I am sharing the only 5 vegetables I believe are truly worth your time and effort if you are working with a small garden. These are not just my personal favorites. These are the 5 that consistently deliver the most food, the most nutrition, and the most satisfaction per square foot, based on everything I have learned over years of trial and, honestly, a whole lot of error. Now, I have ordered these deliberately, and the last vegetable on this list is one that most people think requires a sprawling backyard to grow successfully. I used to believe that too. But after I tried growing it in just a 2 by 2 foot space, it honestly transformed my entire approach to small garden productivity. So stick around for that one, because it is a genuine game changer. And after the main list, I have got a quick bonus for you. A kitchen scrap trick that gives you a nearly endless supply of one of the most useful vegetables in any kitchen. It costs almost nothing and takes about 30 seconds to set up. So let us get into this. Here's the principle that ties all 5 of these vegetables together, and it took me way too long to figure this out on my own. In a small garden, your most valuable resource is not soil or sunlight or even water. It is square footage. Every single inch needs to earn its keep. The concept is sometimes called yield density, and it simply means how much food a plant produces relative to the space it occupies. Some vegetables are incredibly generous in a tight space, and others are just space hogs that give you almost nothing in return. I spent years growing things like corn and full-size pumpkins in my little garden, and the return was honestly embarrassing. Once I started thinking in terms of yield per square foot, instead of just picking whatever sounded fun from a seed catalog, everything changed. So here's what actually works, starting with something I wish I had figured out in my very first season. The first vegetable I want to talk about is leaf lettuce, and specifically loose leaf varieties, not head lettuce. This was actually one of my biggest early mistakes. I kept trying to grow iceberg and romaine heads in my small raised bed, and they took up so much room for so long that by the time I finally harvested one head, I had wasted an entire section of my garden for nearly 3 months. Then, a neighbor, and I will be forever grateful to her, told me to try loose leaf lettuce instead. Varieties like black-seeded Simpson, red sales, or oak leaf. And it was like a light switched on in my gardening brain. Here is why loose leaf lettuce is the undisputed champion of small gardens. You can plant it incredibly close together, about 4 to 6 inches apart, and instead of waiting for a full head to form, you just harvest the outer leaves whenever they reach about 4 to 6 inches tall. The plant keeps growing from the center, giving you continuous harvests for weeks, sometimes a full 2 months from a single planting. That is called cut, and come again, harvesting. And it means one small row of lettuce, maybe 2 feet long, can keep your salads going for the better part of an entire season. And here's the part that really connects to sustainable gardening. When your lettuce plants finally bolt, which means they send up a flower stalk and the leaves start to taste bitter, you can save that base. Put it in a shallow dish with about ½ an inch of water on your kitchen windowsill, and many varieties will push out a second flush of tender leaves. It is not going to give you a full harvest like the garden plant did, but it extends the value of that one original seed even further. Now, lettuce does prefer cooler weather, so if you are in zones 7 through 9, plan for spring and fall plantings rather than midsummer. In warmer months, give it some afternoon shade, even just a piece of lightweight shade cloth over a simple wire frame, and you will extend your harvest by a couple of extra weeks. For the space it takes up and the food it gives back, nothing beats loose leaf lettuce in a small garden. But the next vegetable might come close, especially if you pick the right variety and avoid the mistake I made when I first tried it. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Tomatoes in a small garden? Are those not the plants that take over everything and sprawl across half the yard by July? And honestly, you would be right about full-size slicing tomatoes in a lot of the heirloom varieties people love. Those plants can easily spread 3 to 4 feet wide and need serious staking and pruning. But cherry tomatoes, and specifically compact or determinate cherry varieties, are a completely different story. Let me tell you about the season that changed my mind entirely. I planted a single tumbling Tom red in a 14-inch container on my back patio. Just one plant. I was not expecting much, honestly. By mid-August, I was harvesting 20 to 30 cherry tomatoes every single week from that one container. My neighbor genuinely thought I had a whole tomato patch hidden somewhere. I did not. Just that one little plant doing its thing. The varieties that work best in small spaces are ones like Tumbling Tom, Tiny Tim, and Patio Princess. These are determinate or semi-determinate types, meaning they grow to a set size and stop, usually around 2 to 3 feet tall. They do not need the massive cages and constant pruning that indeterminate varieties demand. You can grow them in a container, in a corner of a raised bed, or even in a hanging basket on a sunny porch. The key to getting the most out of cherry tomatoes in a compact space is consistent watering, about 1 inch per week, and feeding them with a balanced fertilizer every 2 weeks once they start flowering. A little bit of calcium, like crushed eggshells worked into the soil at planting time, goes a long way toward preventing blossom end rot, which is probably the single most frustrating thing that happens to tomato growers everywhere. I dealt with it for 2 seasons before I figured out that simple fix. The yield per square foot from a good cherry tomato variety is genuinely hard to beat. We are talking pounds and pounds of sweet tomatoes from a single plant that occupies maybe 2 square feet. And those kitchen scraps, the seeds you scoop out when you slice one open for a salad, those can become next year's plants with just a little patience and a sunny window. But what you pair with those tomatoes in your small garden matters quite a bit. And that leads me to something I wish I had started growing much, much sooner. This next one took me 3 full seasons to finally try, and I genuinely kick myself for waiting so long. Bush beans. I avoided them for years because I associated all beans with those massive pole bean teepees that my grandmother used to grow in her big backyard, the kind that needed 8-foot trellises and completely dominated an entire garden bed. But bush beans are nothing like that. They are compact, they are fast, and they are incredibly productive for the space they take up. Here is what finally sold me. I planted a double row of provider bush beans. Just 12 plants total, in a space about 18 inches wide and 3 feet long. That is less than 4 square feet of garden. Within 50 days from the day I dropped those seeds in the soil, I was picking handfuls of crisp green beans every other day. And the harvest kept coming strong for nearly 3 weeks straight. The real secret with bush beans is succession planting. Put in a new short row every 2 to 3 weeks from your last frost date through about midsummer, and you will have fresh beans continuously instead of one big glut followed by nothing for the rest of the season. Each planting takes up almost no space, and the turnaround is remarkably fast. But here's the bonus that makes bush beans truly special in any garden, especially a small one. They are nitrogen fixers. They have a symbiotic relationship with beneficial bacteria in the soil that actually pull nitrogen out of the air and convert it into a form your plants can use. So when your bean plants are finally done producing, do not pull them out by the roots. Cut them off at the soil line and leave those roots right there in the ground. They will slowly release that stored nitrogen and feed whatever you plant next in that exact spot. It is like a free dose of fertilizer, built right into your crop rotation. That is smart, sustainable gardening at its finest. Now, before I get to the next vegetable, I want to mention something for those of you who are really serious about getting the most out of a small garden, especially when it comes to sustainability and reducing waste. If you are enjoying these tips and you want the complete system for turning your kitchen scraps into a thriving garden, I put together something called the 30-Day Kitchen Scrap Garden Protocol. It is a 171-page guide that covers 31 different crops you can regrow from scraps, a $10 starter kit guide so you do not waste money on things you do not actually need, zero waste kitchen strategies, and complete troubleshooting for when things do not go as planned. It is $17, and you can grab it by scanning the QR code on screen right now or clicking the link in the description at backyardbuddybooks.com. I genuinely wish I had something like this when I started out. It would have saved me years of frustrating guesswork. All right, let us keep going, because the next two vegetables on this list are where things get really interesting. Now, this next vegetable is one that I honestly used to overlook completely. I thought of radishes as just a garnish, that little pink slice on the side of a restaurant salad that nobody actually bothers to eat. I was so wrong about them, and here's exactly why. Radishes are the fastest producing vegetable you can grow in a garden. We are talking 21 to 30 days from seed to harvest for most common varieties. That is 3 to 4 weeks. You plant them, you barely have time to forget about them, and suddenly you are pulling plump, crisp, peppery radishes right out of the soil. In a small garden where every week of growing season counts, that speed is absolutely everything. Here's how I use them now. I treat radishes as my garden's gap fillers. Anytime I have a small open space between my larger plants, or I have just harvested something and I am waiting a week or two to plant the next crop, in go the radish seeds. A packet of Cherry Bell or French breakfast radish seeds costs about $2 and contains hundreds of seeds. That is potentially dozens of harvests from a single $2 investment over the course of a season. But what really changed my entire perspective on radishes was learning to grow them in succession, just like the beans I mentioned earlier. I drop a short row of seeds, maybe 12 inches long, every 10 days from early spring through fall. Each little row gives me 8 to 12 radishes, which is perfect for a week of salads, roasting, pickling, or, honestly, just snacking on them right there in the garden with a little sprinkle of salt. Do not judge me on that one. For spacing, you only need about 1 inch between seeds, and your rows can be as close as 6 inches apart. That is remarkably dense planting for a vegetable that actually produces real, substantial food you will look forward to eating. And here is something a lot of gardeners do not realize. When your radishes inevitably bolt in the summer heat, those seed pods that form on the flower stalks are completely edible. They are crunchy, peppery, and honestly delicious in a stir-fry or tossed into a salad. So even when your radishes technically fail, they are still feeding you. I love a vegetable that refuses to let you down. All of that brings me to the final vegetable on this list, and this is the one I mentioned right at the very beginning, the one that completely changed how I think about small garden productivity. I need to be honest with you about this. When a friend first suggested I grow zucchini in my small garden, I actually laughed at her. I told her that zucchini plants were basically small trees, and there was absolutely no way I had room for one. I had seen my uncle's zucchini plants sprawl across half his vegetable patch every summer, vines going 6 feet in every direction, taking over pathways and choking out everything nearby. There was simply no way that plant belonged in my 60 square feet. Or so I thought. Then she told me about compact bush varieties, and everything I thought I knew about zucchini went right out the window. The variety that changed my mind was called Astia. It is a French bush zucchini specifically bred for container and small space growing. This plant stays in a neat, tidy mound about 2 to 3 feet across instead of sending out those massive, sprawling runners. I planted just one single plant in a 2-foot by 2-foot section of my raised bed. 4 square feet total. And from mid-June through late September, that single plant produced somewhere between 25 and 30 zucchinis. I actually started keeping a tally on a little notepad because I genuinely could not believe what was happening. The math on this is almost ridiculous when you work it out. Each zucchini weighs roughly 6 to 8 ounces at ideal harvest size, so we are talking somewhere around 12 to 15 pounds of food from 4 square feet of garden space over an entire season. From one plant. I truly do not know of another vegetable that even comes close to that kind of yield density in a small garden. Now, the key to keeping a compact zucchini productive in a limited space is harvesting frequently. Pick them when they are 6 to 8 inches long. I know it is tempting to let them grow into those enormous baseball bats we have all seen people joke about in August, but here's what happens when you do that. The plant puts all of its energy into maturing that one giant fruit and dramatically slows down production of new ones. Harvest regularly every 2 to 3 days during peak season, and the plant just keeps pushing out more and more fruit. The other lesson I learned the hard way is about pollination. In a small garden with fewer plants overall, you might not have enough pollinators visiting regularly to naturally pollinate all the flowers. After losing an entire early crop to poor pollination, those little fruits that would start forming and then just shrivel up and fall off, I started hand pollinating. It takes about 30 seconds per flower. You just take a small paintbrush or even a cotton swab, dab the pollen from a male flower, and gently brush it onto the center of a female flower. The female flowers are easy to identify because they have a tiny swelling at the base that looks like a miniature zucchini. Once I started doing that simple step, my fruit set went from maybe 50% to nearly 100%. Other compact varieties well worth trying include Patio Star, Buckingham, and Bush Baby. Any of these will thrive in a container that is at least 18 inches deep or in a small raised bed section. 1 or 2 plants is honestly all any family needs, and you will still end up with more zucchini than you know what to do with. That is a promise I am comfortable making. Now that you know the 5 vegetables that give you the best return in a small garden, let me quickly walk through a few common mistakes I see people make with small space growing. And I made every single one of these myself, so there is no judgment here whatsoever. The first one is growing too many varieties at once. I understand the temptation completely. Those seed catalogs arrive in January with all their gorgeous pictures, and suddenly you want to grow 40 different things. But in a small garden, spreading yourself that thin means nothing gets enough space, enough attention, or enough nutrients to really thrive. A better approach is picking your 5 best performers, like the ones we just discussed, and growing them exceptionally well rather than growing 20 things poorly. Focus beats variety every time in a small space. The second mistake is completely ignoring vertical space. If you have a small footprint on the ground, you absolutely have to think upward. Even a simple trellis, a tomato cage, or a vertical pocket planter adds productive growing area without stealing more of your precious ground space. I wasted 2 full seasons before I finally looked up and realized I had all this unused vertical real estate just sitting there doing nothing. The third common mistake is planting everything at the same time in spring and then having absolutely nothing to harvest by mid-August. Succession planting, which we talked about with both the beans and the radishes, is the difference between a single harvest event and a season-long continuous food supply. Stagger your plantings every 2 to 3 weeks throughout the growing season, and your small garden becomes a reliable, ongoing source of fresh food instead of a one-time event. And the fourth mistake, and this is one that really cost me, is not amending your soil between plantings. In a small space, your soil works much harder than soil in a big, sprawling garden because you are asking it to support intensive production. Add a thin layer of compost, even just half an inch, every time you clear a section and replant. Your soil biology stays active, and your plants will absolutely thank you for it with better growth and bigger harvests. Here is that bonus I promised you at the very beginning of this video. The kitchen scrap trick for a nearly endless supply of one of the most versatile vegetables around, green onions. Next time you buy a bunch of green onions from the grocery store, do not throw away the root ends. Cut the green tops about 1 inch above the white roots, stick those little stubs in a jar with about ½ inch of water, and set them on a sunny windowsill. Within 3 to 4 days, you will see fresh, green growth sprouting up. Within about 2 weeks, you will have full-length green onions ready to cut and use again. And here's the best part. You can transfer those rooted stubs right into your garden soil or a small pot, and they will keep producing for months on end. I have personally gotten 5 to 6 full harvests from a single bunch of grocery store green onions. That is essentially free food from something most people toss straight into the trash without a second thought. Sustainable gardening truly does not get simpler or more satisfying than that. Now, those 5 vegetables plus the green onion trick are a fantastic starting point for anyone working with a small garden. But if you really want to take this further and build a complete system for regrowing food from scraps and getting the absolute most from every square foot you have, that is exactly what the 30-Day Kitchen Scrap Garden Protocol was designed to help you do. It is 171 pages covering 31 different crops you can regrow from kitchen scraps, step by step, with photos and detailed troubleshooting for every single one. It also includes a $10 starter kit guide so you know exactly what to buy and what to skip, 0 waste strategies for your entire kitchen, and a clear day-by-day schedule so you are never wondering what to do next. It is available for $17 right now at backyardbuddybooks.com. Just scan the QR code on screen or click the link down in the description. I genuinely believe it is the most practical guide out there for anyone who wants to grow more food while wasting less of what they already have. You know, a small garden does not have to mean small harvests. It just means being smarter and more intentional about what you choose to grow. I would love to hear which of these 5 vegetables you are planning to try first this season, or if you have a small garden favorite I did not mention, drop it in the comments below. Happy gardening, and I will see you in the next one.